This episode is brought to you by the Marine Corps Association and Foundation. The Marine Corps Association is committed to our mission of providing resources for professional military education and esprit de corps. If you like what we're doing, consider donating. There are multiple ways to give, such as our year-end giving. Join our year-end matching gift challenge by donating to the Marine Corps Association by December 31st. Your tax-deductible donation will be tripled, going 3 times as far to fund professional development programs for Marines. Every gift strengthens our Corps. Give today at mca-marines.org/donate-to-MCAF and help shape tomorrow's Marine leaders.
Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, this is episode 166. This week we welcome Elliot Ackerman to the show. Elliot is a veteran Marine, infantry, and MARSOC officer, CIA paramilitary operative, and the author of Green on Blue, Dark at the Crossing, Waiting for Eden, and 2034, a novel of the next World War, and many others. He is also a journalist who frequently contributes to the Atlantic and New York Times. Elliot talks to us about his Marine Corps journey, his transition to becoming an award-winning author, reading as wargaming, and the value of a military imagination. It was great having Elliot on the show to hear his story. Here is episode 166.
Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thanks for tuning in. As always, I appreciate your constant support. I am Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hi, everyone.
And we're really excited to be welcoming Elliot Ackerman to the show. For those who don't know the name, Elliot is a veteran Marine, the recipient of the Silver Star for his actions in Iraq, Bronze Star with V device for his actions in Afghanistan. He served as a Marine infantryman, then MARSOC, then was with the CIA paramilitary units. Since getting out, he's become a very accomplished author, journalist. I could tell you the awards, but they're myriad. I will say that on there are New York Times Book Review Editor's Choices multiple years, Marine Corps Heritage Foundation James Webb Award in 2019, Time Magazine Best Books of the Year, etc., etc. Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Yeah, this is really quite fortuitous. So I want to give a big shout out to Gunnery Sergeant McGordy Hunter for inviting us to the Staff Academy's lecture series, where Elliot, you were the guest lecturer. Just a wonderful presentation on leadership. Lots of great nuggets of wisdom for the future leaders of the Marine Corps, the sergeants and staff sergeants that were in attendance. And then I just couldn't leave the lecture without asking you to be on the show. So thank you so much for coming on. And this is a really great an opportunity. I'm really excited to start diving in.
No, thanks for having me.
So before we start talking about your books and your writing, and really diving into imagination and what the military, how necessary it is for military leadership, for strategy and policy making. Can you tell us a little bit about your career? I tried to not bog down the intro so much that you didn't have any time to actually talk about your own life. But could you tell us a little bit about sort of your journey to the Yellow Footprints, like where you're from? Was the Marine Corps always something that you wanted to do, or was it sort of your late in life, like a late bloomer like me? How was it that you became to wear the uniform?
Oh, sure. Well, I came into the Marine Corps through Naval ROTC. So I went to Tufts University and enrolled in that program in 1998. So it was very much a peacetime Marine Corps. And then September 11th happened while I was in college and kind of almost done with the ROTC program. So the Marine Corps I graduated into in 2003 was a wartime Marine Corps. And I see, my reasons for joining the Marine Corps were many. It was something I guess I came to sort of later in my teen years. I was probably about 17 when I decided I wanted to join the Marine Corps. I abstractly knew that I wanted a job, or whether I was good at my job or bad at my job, really mattered. And I wanted a lot of responsibility at a young age. That all appealed to me, and the Marine Corps certainly offered that. Particularly as like a young Marine officer, I couldn't think of anywhere else where at 23 years old they're going to put you in charge of 45 people. And I grew up overseas too, so I think that maybe gave me kind of a perspective on what it means to be an American, and sort of a desire to serve and to give something back. And I'd say lastly too, I was kind of like that kid who never stopped playing with his GI Joe. So I always had this like secret like fascination with all things military. So you combine those sort of led me into the Marine Corps. And then as I mentioned, I graduated in 2003. Went to Quantico in the basic school. I knew I wanted to be an infantry officer, and then went to my first unit, which was 1st Battalion, 8th Marine Regiment.
Okay. Yeah, that's so funny to mention the GI Joes, because I'd actually wrote that in my essay, and my OSO assistant said, "Hey, you shouldn't put GI Joe in there because that's Army." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Look, you asked me to tell you my story. I grew up playing with GI Joes. Like, I'm a junior in college, and just a couple years ago, I finally got rid of them all. So, like, no, I'm gonna leave it in."
Yeah, although Joe was in a very heavily fictionalized army, so I think it's a stretch to say he was like in the real U.S. Army.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, Gung Ho was one of the Keystone members, with
That's
his
right. Yes,
flak jacket with no undershirt.
That's right.
Well, Elliot, how did your family feel about your decision to go into the Marine Corps?
I think every family definitely takes a journey when they have a loved one who's in the service and in the Marines. I did not come from a Marine family, so it certainly felt a little bit foreign to them. Candidly, I think my father sort of just understood it on a visceral level. I think it was a little bit more confusing to my mother, again, because I wasn't this kid who was necessarily an obvious Marine. Like before my senior year in high school, I'd never played a varsity sport. I was a little bit of kind of a slacker and a ne'er-do-well. So this sort of awakening that I had where I decided I was gonna, I marched into the family kitchen and said I'm gonna be a Marine, kind of took her by surprise. But again, like the moment I announced I was going to be a Marine to the time I was actually on active duty deploying was about 6 or 7 years. So everyone sort of had time to adjust. And then there was also sort of the wars going on too, which I think really underlined the experience and made the stakes obviously much higher within our family. But I would say from where I started and the reticence my family felt is sort of when I was leaving government service and was sort of on a cycle where I was, deployed for 70 days, home for 50, gone all the time, and no one in my family really blinked an eyelash because they just sort of gotten used to that this was what we did. So I think if you're not in a military family, by the time you leave the service, you are of a military family. So that transformation occurs too.
Yeah, I just want to note for our listeners that the fact that you said ne'er-do-well means you truly were a ne'er-do-well and an author too. So thank you so much for saying.
Sure.
Well, you come out of TBS as an infantry officer, head over to 1-8. What led you towards MARSOC?
I had sort of taken I'd always wanted to go into what was then Force Reconnaissance.
Oh yeah.
Which was our special operations unit, and I had been very fortunate while I'd been in college between summers. I've been able to go to a number of kind of extracurricular training events. So I had been able to talk my way into jump school, and I had talked my way into dive school. And I also talked my way into the amphibious reconnaissance school, and that's all how that worked is like kind of a much longer story. I got very, very lucky, and some great mentors really helped me along the way. So I was, really wanted my next step after I left my infantry unit to go over to Force Reconnaissance. And then sort of, magically Force Reconnaissance ceased to exist, and it became MARSOC. So the unit I wanted to go to, which was Second Force Reconnaissance Company, then in 2006-7 became Second Marine Special Operations Battalion, and so I was among the first group of Marines over there, which was great. It was very exciting. We were standing it up, and it was sort of you were racing the car down the track while you were painting it and trying to put the wheels on it. So,
Yeah.
so it was a lot of fun and very exciting, and also definitely had its headaches and growing pains.
Sure. And that was were you guys over at Courthouse Bay? Is that where you guys were first standing up, or?
Yeah, no, we were. Yeah, we were Courthouse Bay, building Alpha 66, which is still where Second Raider Battalion is today.
Yeah, because I've always done, all my stuff has been West Coast, but I did some TAD trips out to Lejeune when I was I&I, and obviously seen Courthouse Bay a few times as an Amtrak or whatever, and then
Yeah,
so you see like this. We'll just say for the building for second tracks, Marines, I love you guys, but the big thing you tell yourself when you go to second tracks is, oh, is this a historic building? And then you just go to a little bit down the road, and then there's the new MSOB Raider Battalion building. You're like, what the hell? Like I got Lyme disease taking a piss over here, and here's this I get a chiropractor it's assigned to the building down this way. But anyhow, yeah, it's really nice, and I think they were still building it at the time when I was doing all that back in 08, 09 and stuff. So anyhow, so I guess just to then take your career on so you're going on these deployments. You did Iraq as an infantryman. Then you had was it then if it was Afghanistan? Was that with a MARSOC?
Yeah, my sort of deployment history was I showed up to 1-8 in April of 2004. And we left for Iraq in June. We were in Iraq from June 04 to early February 05. And the big thing on that deployment was the Fallujah battle in December 2004. And we came back from that, and we got slated to the 2-4 MEU. So we were doing workups for the 2-4 MEU, and then a Hurricane Katrina rolled through, and we were on ACM, Air Contingency MAGTF. So we all got flown down to New Orleans. We did Fleet Week, actually, and then we got flown down to New Orleans at the end of the summer. So it was a very eventful summer for us. And we spent a little over a month in New Orleans. And then we deployed with the MEU that January of 06. And then while we were out with that MEU, we deployed the MEU June of 06. And while we were out with that MEU, that's when Israel invaded Lebanon. There was sort of an interesting symmetry there because 1-8 is the Beirut Battalion. 1-8 was the infantry battalion at the barracks, and when the barracks bombing occurred, it was the 24th Marine Amphibious Unit that was deployed on the USS Iwo Jima. So here we were that summer. Israel invades Lebanon, and we did the NEO out of Beirut, and it was once again 1-8. Now with the 2-4 MEU instead of the 2-4 MA, and we were again on the USS Iwo Jima. The refit of Iwo Jima. So we were back out there again. So we did that, came back from that deployment, and then I went over to MARSOC as a team leader there, and we were in Afghanistan in 2008.
And so the reason, that's all fascinating. That seems like. I'm not going to do, but you weren't home much, I guess, is really kind of the takeaway. It seems like you almost were hot racking some of these deployments, which I guess was the state of play between 04 and I guess 12, right? When we had all of these various surges in all of these different locations. Yeah, I was able to squeeze in B billets, so it wasn't quite as gnarly as how what your experience is.
It was pretty, it was, I guess it was sort of all I knew and all we knew, but it was pretty busy. I know we came back from Iraq, and we did a MU workup, and we did a full, that whole 18-month cycle, like a year home, and then 6 months deployed. But even ever that seems slow comparatively,
Right.
because I think a lot of infantry units, were doing, like, they were home for maybe 9 months, and then they were going
Yep.
right back out again to Iraq. And some of them were home for like 7 months, and then right back out for another 7 months. So it was just a very busy time. But simultaneously, I mean, you're like a young lieutenant. You don't know any better, or know
Yeah.
anything
Yeah. No,
different.
totally.
Just pack everything in your car and go on deployment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure,
Exactly.
why
Like,
not?
yeah. It's like for my apartments for a while there, man. It was just like all I need is a roof and a place to put my surfboards and a place to put my head. Like, because I'm probably not going to be here very long.
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
So all that is to say, then you first started releasing your book, your first book, Green on Blue. That hit the streets about when was the publication date on that? Is that 14?
No, so that book came out. So I was at MARSOC, and then I came back from that deployment in 2009. And then I had a couple friends of mine who were working at the agency. They recruited me to come over and work there. And then I worked there for a couple of years. And then I left in 2011. I just sort of, it'd been 8 years of deploying, and I had a great time and worked with some great people. I just sort of made the decision that, it wasn't being a special operations guy, it wasn't the only thing I wanted to do with my life. I think there was other things I wanted to do. And I got out, I worked for a year in politics, and then I had a government fellowship for about a year. And I was kind of quietly trying to write a book, and kind of working on that nights, weekends. And then I sold my first book because I sold it in 2013, and then it came out in 2015, and that was Green on Blue.
Okay.
So did you always know that you wanted to write a book or write books, or did the idea for that first book come to you and you said, I got to get this down on paper?
Well, I always suspected that I might write something, and I wasn't writing while I was in the service at all. But then kind of as I was leaving, I was like, well, maybe I would write something. And there had been these books that really like meant a lot to me, when I was my, 17, 18-year-old self, like deciding I'm going to go into the Marines, but not really knowing what any of it meant. So books that I read, like, like Jim Webb's Fields of Fire, which is all about a Marine rifle platoon in Vietnam, in the Arizona Valley. Books like The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, Matterhorn by Carl Malone. So a lot of these books were, and plenty of nonfiction books too, but there were a lot of kind of novels that had meant a whole lot to me. And when I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll write something, I was like, what type of book would I like to write? I sort of didn't have any desire to write like kind of a, excuse my language, for like a, no shit, there I was memoir. I'm like,
Yeah, I
man,
got
no
the
shit, there we
t-shirt.
were,
Yeah.
and it was going down. Yeah, like I don't know, I didn't, and those books had never appealed to me as much. So, and I thought at first I was like, I'd like to try to see if I could write a book, that would be in the spirit of like Fields of Fire. And kind of this idea too, just abstractly speaking, I was like, because someday there's going to be like some 17-year-old kid, some version of me, who's going to be walking off to the Marine Corps or wherever, and they're going to be saying, well, what's this experience like? And just like I reach back to the Vietnam guys, or the generation older than me, those people are going to reach back to my generation. And I had this feeling that, after all the wars, like that those of us who'd served in them, we had kind of become the custodians of that memory. There's like, there's no one else but us to write about this, So anyway, so I sort of had this idea of like, all right, I want to kind of try to write a semi-autobiographical war novel. So I sat down, and as I mentioned, kind of nights, weekends, I'm kind of like, figuring out how to write this book. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it, because frankly, like, to say like, oh, I'm writing a novel when I had nothing to show for it, or I want to be a writer when I had nothing to show for it, it kind of sounded like, it sounded silly. It sounded like telling people, like, oh, I want to dance, I'm going to be a dancer. Like, I like it. It didn't seem serious. So nobody knew I was sort of secretly doing this. But once I kind of had enough I had a draft of a book, and I gave it to one or two people to read, and I felt like it was good. I sent it to I sent it to a friend of the family who I knew, who had worked in publishing. And I actually got a book agent very, very quickly, who's still my book agent today, who's become a fantastic friend. And he's like, "This is great. Like, we're gonna go out with this. Here's and I know nothing about publishing. He's like, here's the list of the 26 editors at these various, New York City publishing houses I'm gonna send it to." And in my mind, I was like, wow, like, everyone told me how hard this is. Like, this hasn't been that hard. This has been pretty easy. And then the book goes out to these 26 publishers, and it was like, I don't know, he sent it like in maybe like June timeframe, late June. Kind of the summer rolls out, like a week passes, 2 week passes, 2 weeks pass, 6 weeks pass, and I'm like, "Hey, whatever happened with the book you submitted?" And I get this spreadsheet back, and it's all of the 26 rejections of that book. And so that wasn't a lot of fun. And I'm like, wow, what do I do? And somewhere along the line, as I'd been writing that book, I kind of got to the point, like, maybe this is what I want to try to do. And someone had said to me, actually, it was my father at one point. He said, "Well, you're a real writer if you can write 2 books. You think you can write 2 books?" And I sort of took it as like a challenge. Like, yeah, I can write 2 books. And someone had once said to me, the best thing to do when you finish writing a book and you're kind of waiting to get news is to start your next book. So I had fortunately started my next book. And my agent came back to me, like, "Listen, we didn't seem to sell this one. Maybe you can rework it. And you have that other book you mentioned you're working on. Why don't you redo the first book and finish the second book and let's see where you're at." So I basically took about a year to do that. Came back with the 2 books, handed them to him. He reread the first one that I'd redrafted and said, like, I don't know if there are enough changes here for me to go back to people. And he read the second, was like, "Hey, I like this." Sent out the second. And that second book became my first book, which was Green on Blue, which is the story. It's a story of an American who's killed by an Afghan, but the whole book is told from the perspective of the Afghan. And I only share that anecdote because writers very rarely actually talk about their failures or their struggles. And so sometimes, all you look at is like, oh, the successes. But every writer I know, if you get them drunk enough, will tell you their sort of tales of woe and their projects that never worked. And I think it's important to talk about that stuff.
No, that's really great. Yeah, having come through the MFA program AU, it was very much that, like, well, the answer is no until you submit, right? Like, it's for sure no until you submit. But yeah, it's be prepared for lots of actual no's after you do submit.
Yeah, that's right.
But no, that's really fascinating. Yeah, that seems like such a like you're on this meteoric rise, but I guess like with everything is that you get this like really steep glide slope initially, and then it just either plateaus and you just end up in limbo for a while. But in a lot of ways, though, do you feel like there are sort of parallels too with sort of the Marine Corps? If you were to take, sort of the general officer path, for example, you get all this really great experience, all this great stuff as a company grade officer, and then like you hit field grade, and then it's like, oh, cool. What staff billets would you like to pick up? Or like, how about go working at PP&O for a while? Or like, oh my God, and then like, cool, I get to go back to the fleet. Like, yeah, at a regimental headquarters. How's that? It's like, I don't know. I wonder about that sort of. Is it allegorical? That we get those kinds of experiences?
I don't know if a writing career is allegorical to sort of a Marine Corps career. I mean, I think they're very different ways of being. I mean, I remember at one point I was having a conversation with my uncle who had a very business career, and he's a scrappy guy, and he was asking me about what I do. And I kind of said to him, and I was explaining the ins and outs. And I sort of at one point said to him, I said, I mean, it's a tough business. You know what I mean? And he kind of looked at me and said, "Elliot, they're all tough businesses." And I was like, that's really true. Like, I mean, sometimes you'll look at the writing or the arts or anything like, wow, it's such a tough business. Like everything, go try to like, I don't know, sell widgets for a living. Like, see if anybody wants your widgets. Like they usually don't. You know what I mean? It's like it's tough, and I think that's just good to have that perspective that if you want to create or do anything, you're going to be, you're always going to be up against a lot of resistance. And it's totally natural part of the process, and nothing comes easy. And success comes to those people who are gritty. I mean, like, and I do think, if the career trajectories aren't the same, the one thing that I feel that the Marine Corps equipped me for very well, in my current life, is just to be gritty. Like, to be like, every morning I'm up, I'm in the seat, I'm doing the work, I'm grinding it out. Now in my life today, that means like I'm grinding it out, like I'm working on my project every day, sustained, like incremental progress as I inch forward. If something doesn't go my way, or I get knocked down, I get back up, I keep going. Like, the Marine Corps taught me that, even though it might not be, writing words every day, and it's like, logging your miles, or, doing whatever, that drive through the front gate at Lejeune at 5:15 in the morning to go to work, like day after day after day, like, that type of grittiness that you learn in the service. I think it keeps you in really good stead for anything you will do afterward. And so I've always been very grateful for that.
So what was that like? I guess if we can sort of Tarantino this interview a little bit, go back, your experience with the CIA. So I wonder about that. One, if you could share the story that you talked about at the lecture series about how, now granted you were being recruited, so it's a little different, but you did literally apply online. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I was asked to, yeah, but put in your resume. But yeah, you put in your resume online. They have so
Yeah.
sometimes things are not as mysterious as they seem.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, that's very unglamorous.
very unglamorous, very human. So, all of these organizations are composed of human beings, and it's always important to keep that in mind.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I feel like the Indeed campaign needs the CIA operative who loses a special operator, like, I need Indeed, and then some other dude in a
Yeah,
black thing with M4, like, Indeed
exactly.
you do, whatever.
Exactly.
So then you enter in. So how would that work? I know when I was with McTim in the UAE, we had about 3 or 4 different bosses. We had Fifth Meb, who sort of oversaw some things for us. CENTCOM also had some of their fingers in the works. DOS, because we fell under Chief of Mission, and then the Emiratis themselves obviously had some say in what it was that we were doing. Was the command relationship pretty well defined, or were you dealing with a lot of that stuff too? Because I mean, you were still a Marine, right?
When I was at the agency,
Yeah.
no, I was not a Marine. I was a
Oh
civilian
no,
at
so
that
you
point.
were okay.
Yeah, no, I was completely out. So I was
Oh, I
out,
see.
and worked directly for them. And like anything, it's an you're working interagency. So, sometimes there are very clear hierarchies and chains of command, but oftentimes, you just have to be the type of person who plays well with others.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real imperative in any organization to be the type of person who knows how to play well with others. And it's the type of person that, people who are in your chain of command or in your organization want to work with, but the type of person who, other people want to work with too. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure we've all met the folks who play well with others, and we've all sort of been stuck with the folks who don't. And we know
Yeah.
which type we'd like to be with.
Yeah, totally shameless plug. We're running in the Gazette a series on liaison officers, and that's
Right.
like rule number one is play well with others, because like you said, you could almost like a sixth sense. You can sort of sniff them out.
Yeah, and I think,
And
listen, there's sometimes this sense that, like, if there is, I mean, chain of command is important, but as we all know, like, chain of command is never just enough. Like, even when there is like a very, very clear and defined chain of command, all authority doesn't derive from the chain of command. A lot of times, authority just derives from respect. How people carry themselves, how people are at getting the job done. So, So I think it's, really just, any job in the military, but if you're running a piece in the Gazette, it's critical to have those folks who just, know how to, again, play well with others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then, so we looking at your career, then your sort of your experiences, that you sort of, I guess, as we were talking about writing, imagination, sort of development of like diverse ways of thinking. Obviously, all those things play into what you're talking about, is that respect and being able to play well with others. As you're coming into, then, you would think that something like the military, that has very rigid hierarchical structures, very strict adherence to discipline and orders. Obviously, it is a machine, and then moving into then the arts. So you have your time then with the CIA, and then other experiences in government. But as you move into the arts, then sort of the perception is that, oh, it's very much more laissez-faire, man. Like, yeah, take it all in, and look at the beauty in the world. Like, don't be so strict, so rigid. Where did you find that was there a culture shift for you in that, as you went full time into the arts and sort of embraced your identity as an artist now? Or were there things that were transferable, and things that, other than grit, that the Marine Corps sort of prepared you for this life in the arts?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people have the perception that, like, art is the place that you go and there are no rules and you just express yourself all over the place, and that is how art is made. And that's not art. That's what we call finger painting. Um, you know, art is, there are rules. It takes a lot of discipline to show up and understand how to create within the constraints of your rules. I would say, so the one part of it that, at least my art form, which is not a collaborative art form, which is very different, is you're by yourself a lot. So if you were to give me a Myers-Briggs test, I'm like kind of your classic introvert extrovert, meaning I love being around people. I love talking with people. I love being in a group, but I lose energy when I do that. So when I do recharge, I have to go be with myself. So, when I was a Marine officer or a special operator, like, that's a very extroverted job. I mean, all day long, all I was doing was kind of talking with people, having meetings, dealing with problems, trying to move a group or be part of a group that was moving in a unified direction. And then I would have to kind of go, my introverted self would have to like rest from time to time and read a book or watch a movie. Now, what I do now is just very solitary. I mean, many of my days I will put in a full dynamic work day while never leaving my room and never talking to a person. And that's great. And, I think in our lives, we all have different chapters and we engage with different parts of our personality at different times. So like, people who've known me, sometimes people will say to me, like, Elliot, it's so odd that you went from, being this, Marine officer and special operator into the arts. That seems like two very different career paths. But actually, the people who've known me the longest, since I was like this ne'er-do-well skater kid in my teens, said, Elliot, we always thought it was so odd that you ever wound up in the Marine Corps. And I think that's just a manifestation of, you're different people at different times, because you're engaging with different parts of your personality at different times. But for me, the through line I have always felt between my time in the Marine Corps and my time in the arts is that both of them they require a type of, seriousness and discipline. I mean, it doesn't mean like I'm not a fun guy. I like to share a laugh like anyone else, but when it's time to work, it's time to work. And I'm serious about my work, and I was serious about my work in the Marine Corps, and I'm serious about my work now as a writer.
Having working for a day in a solitary environment without leaving your office and never talking to people is you've basically described my dream day. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. I'm yay.
Yeah.
Is that why
So
every time I walk in your office, you close the door?
yeah, and you know, if I could see you coming, I'd close it before you got there. I'm just kidding. Well, so because writing is such a solitary pursuit, and because it requires so much focus, and you know, you've probably got these stories and these characters living in your head, does that allow you the space to also read for pleasure, like you did when you were growing up?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's really essential. I mean, listen, everyone I know who, I mean, my wife is a writer. She writes novels and screenplays and writes for Hollywood. And she and I have different approaches to how we work. So everyone kind of figures out the way that they work. So what I'm saying is not like to be prescriptive, because I know lots of people work differently. But for me, when if I'm working on something new, I'll have my hours in the day that I'm working on that, whether it's like, I don't know, like 8 to 1 or whatever that time is. But then I'll kind of reach the end of that day's work and I sort of shut it and I put it aside. And I think it's very important then to just not try to not really think about it directly. Just let it sink into my subconscious until it's time to pick it up the next day. And that's when I'm really, yeah, that's when I'm reading. That's where I kind of allow my subconscious and my associative mind to work. And I couldn't tell you how many times, if I'm working on a project that it's just the way many people's brains work, and mine certainly does, where I'll then be, the next morning on my run or like in the shower or shaving. And, and some idea will come to me very, very clearly. And I'm like, oh my God, yes, this is how this works. Yeah, I figured something out. And then, I'll scribble it down or whatever. So, but it's important to create like the cognitive space to allow that to occur. And oftentimes for me, those ideas happen to me, yes, when I'm, shaving, working out, walking, oftentimes when I'm reading. And when I'm reading, I'll be reading something totally unrelated and some idea will pop into my head about what I'm working on based off of a word I see. So I think it's critically important to always be reading, and not just as a writer. I mean, I think also when I was in the Marine Corps, I was always reading, and often things that had absolutely nothing to do with my being a Marine, but usually my best ideas would just sort of pop into my head as I was reading something unrelated.
Well, and at the lecture that Vic referenced earlier that we listened to, where we heard you speaking, you talked about having a book club for your Marines, and how they were not terribly pleased with it, and it really hit me. You said the first book you assigned them to read was Starship Troopers, and it hit me. When my youngest son was about 16 or 17, he said, "Mom, you've got to read this book." And I said, "What is it?" And he told me about it. He told me all about Heinlein and his history and how he'd served in the Navy in World War II. And I just like, I don't want to read this. This science fiction is not my genre. I don't want to read this. But I didn't want to disappoint him. Like, oh, sure, I'll read it. And I figure I'll just, I'll skim it. I'll read a couple of pages. We can talk about it. He'll forget about it. And then that'll be it. I'll have checked that parenting box. And I fell into the book. I just could not, like, it's absolutely incredible and amazing. And it's most definitely not strictly a science fiction book. So when you mentioned that as, being the first thing you assigned, I really need to know, why did you choose that?
Oh, well, I wish you'd been in that rifle platoon many years ago. You would have gotten like perfect marks on your pro cons. It's a lot of the 19 and 20-year-old guys in that platoon. Yeah, they did not want to read that book. I had the experience just going through the basic school. I think we read Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, which, I think like every Marine comes across that book at some point. And I just remember that being a really good way to just have like kind of a running conversation in our class. And And interestingly enough, I mean, to kind of get into Marine Corps dynamics, the young guys in the platoon who just like checked in from like the School of Infantry actually were kind of into it. They're like, all right, great, like they were super motivated. Like, I'm in the Marines now. It was like the salt dog, the salty, like corporal who'd already made one pomp was, I'm not doing this. And but I picked that book because that book is, it's a great science fiction book, and it's cool, and there's cool action sequences, and it's about the mobile infantry, and we were infantrymen, and they fight the buggers, and the bugger war is kind of an analogy for the war, the Cold War and the war against the Soviets. But it's really also a meditation about citizenship and the role of the soldier in a society. And in the world Heinlein, the society Heinlein creates, citizenship is actually contingent on service, and he poses a lot of kind of interesting questions. So I thought it would have been a good way to get a conversation going in the platoon. So it was a little bit of a false start. I never assigned a book again in any of my units to be like what we were all going to do together, but I was always the guy who recommended books if anyone wanted to ask. But I think it was maybe a little bit of a bridge too far to force everyone in the platoon to read that book, particularly given everything that we had going on at that time.
Well, yeah, I mean, you achieved all your goals with the first book, so why go first? You don't no need for a second.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And it's so interesting to hear you. I know one of the things, one of the constant mantras that I hear from writers is to be a reader. And, as we at the Marine Corps Association, we've got the brand new multi-million-dollar warfighting lab next door to us now. It's all sexy and sweet. And there's a lot of emphasis being put on getting wargaming reps and sets in. It kind of seems like in a lot of ways that like reading is a kind of reps and sets for writing. Would you kind of agree with that, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. It gives you a vernacular, the ability to kind of see patterns in other stories. Gives you a tool bag to reach into, as you're trying to tell a story. How am I going to structure this story? You can look back and be like, oh, maybe I could do it the way this writer did in this other book that I liked. Or I could take some of this and some of that. I mean, you have to know your craft, and the way you learn your craft is by reading. If a lot of people, if someone were to ask me like, how do I learn how to write a novel? I'll say, go read a bunch of novels.
Yeah, read a bunch of novels.
And read like a writer, because you're trying to like figure out what the person is doing. And I know, by the way, I also just enjoy reading. But I think from a mechanics point of view, if you want to be a writer about it, it's kind of how you get your sets in. And I think probably like in the warfighting lab, I mean, the point is just sort of the repetition that you start to see the patterns. You're training your brain cognitively, so that if you're, when you're ever doing the real thing, you have that experience that you've built up through the practice.
Yeah. One of our other guests, Casey Tellison, who wrote the book Freaks of a Feather, mentioned that like when you first start off writing, you're gonna just sort of through muscle memory, you're gonna end up mimicking the people that you read, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And then once you've written some more, and then you'll start to find your voice in their voice. But like initially, your voice is kind of gonna be theirs. But that's all right, because that's how you're going to figure out where it is that you fall in on this thing. And so what does that do then? Because you've written in so many different forms, long form journalism, short form, you've got, credits through multiple periodicals. Obviously you have books, some that are pure fiction, others that are memoir. Where do you fall in? Are you just more of an ideas guy, or do you have a preferred genre and then the story starts to tell itself once you get into writing it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a preferred genre. I think stories lend themselves to different forms. So the question becomes, okay, what is this story, and what's the best way to tell it? I mean, obviously, if you're writing, I've written a fair bit of nonfiction. So when you're writing nonfiction, you're obviously you're telling a story that is true, like these events actually occurred. But you're still deploying lots of tools. I mean, a nonfiction story is not like simply just a recitation of facts. It's you as the author deciding, what images to kind of
Yeah.
close in on, what to emphasize, what information is just sort of exogenous and the reader doesn't need to know, or just it's boring, it's not serving the story. So why, we don't need to know like everything that this character had for breakfast that morning. We can kind of move on and talk about what happened later in the day. I mean,
Yeah.
there are like a million decisions like that. I think, obviously in fiction, you have kind of fewer constraints, but in some ways more constraints because you are creating everything from scratch to include kind of the terms of the world and the rules of the world that you are creating. So when you're writing fiction, you as the author immediately set up a world. Now, like if I were to tell you that, like this novel or this story is set in the year 2024 in Quantico, just by putting an immediate setting on a place, we know like there's certain things that can't happen. Like one thing that can't happen is, you can't have, I don't know, talking dogs or something because there aren't talking
Yeah.
dogs if I tell you it's Quantico 2024. But if I open the story and say like, there are talking dogs in the story, like as you're like, okay, there's talking dogs, like the author told me
Yes,
so,
right.
so he made the rules, so you can say, but you're always putting those constraints around it. So there are plenty of rules in fictions too, but they're rules that the author creates. So, and then I saw like in every story has a form, and yes, there's a difference, but it's not a wild difference, because at the end of the day too, I think you're just trying to create as a writer the type of emotional resonance that makes a good story.
And do you work on more than one project at a time, or do you just keep to one thing until that's completed?
I'll usually have one main thing that I'm working on, and I'll have things that are in various stages of completion. So for instance, like I might have a book project that I'm like trying to get a first draft done on, and that is consuming a big chunk of my time. But then I kind of get it through that first draft to second draft, and I'm, either waiting on a reader or waiting on an editor, and I'll move on to another project. And that editor, that might say like, hey, I'm ready to talk to you about that other book. And I'm like, okay, hold on. And I'll go over here and start working on it again. So I usually have one main thing that I'm working on, but I have other things going on at the same time. My wife calls it deal flow, which is a business term. You always want to have a few things going at once.
Yeah. And so as you're doing those things, you know, sort of, you got your primary, but you've also, so as you're just, I guess, allowing your mind into, you're opening your mind to the idea flow,
Mm-hmm.
and letting the process and the story sort of cohabitate your brain. What are your thoughts when we look at, um we talked about the I guess the science, or the pragmatism of the Marine Corps, being structured the way it is, the similarities in the arts. Where can we see that paradigm work the other way? Where can we see art influencing the Marine Corps, or
Sure.
strategy, or yeah.
Well, I think one of the things you do as an author, is you spend a lot of time occupying the thoughts of other people and trying to understand their worldview and their logic, even if you don't agree with that necessarily. Like I have always felt my job in my books is, when a character walks onto a page, it's as though they're like standing there giving it should be as though they're standing there giving their worldview to you, the reader, as though they're giving their worldview to God. Like this is how I see the world, and it should feel. I aspire to write the types of books that I enjoy, and the books I enjoy is when like I never really know who the bad guy is and the good guy is. Like everyone has a compelling worldview, and those compelling worldviews are at odds with one another, and I don't know what's going to happen. And so I feel that as a military. As a Marine, as someone who serves in the military, you spend a lot of your time trying to understand your adversary and your adversary's worldview and how they're going to look at conflict. And trying to inhabit their thoughts and their mind. And that's something you do as an author too. So again, I mentioned that sometimes people think what I do is like such a huge leap from what I used to do as a Marine officer, but like it's not, there are definitely parts of it that are similar. And becoming kind of all consumed with, maybe your adversary's culture, your adversaries, why are they fighting us? How can we counter them? Like that is something that I think probably every member of the military knows. You can spend your whole life thinking about your adversary. And so you can spend your whole life thinking about your characters too, even though hopefully maybe the relationship isn't quite as adversarial.
Right. So would you say then that like fiction, or at least the type of art that invites the consumer, whether it be a reader or viewer or whomever, that invites that person into the fictive dream, is something that we are people in the military, leaders, policymakers, should be also doing, in that rather than just being so narrowly focused on, I guess, fighting the wars of before, trying to imagine the wars of the future. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. That's good. That's critical. I mean, one of my books, 2034, which we discussed, imagines a war between the U.S. and China in that year. And we had a lot. I wrote that with Admiral Jim Stavridis, and we had a lot of fun imagining what that war would look like. But I would say that's probably an exercise that I certainly hope military leaders are doing as well, sitting at that tabletop and asking hard questions. And I think you see the Marine Corps doing it right now with like FD 2030. Making some really big, bold moves that are being made simply because, as a service, the Marine Corps is imagining what the world's going to look like in a handful of years and saying we got to be ready to fight in this imagined world because it's not going to look like it does right now. So imagination is a key tool for any military officer, one that needs to be cultivated and embraced. And if we look at many of like the great national security challenges that we have faced in the nation, whether it's, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, or the pandemic, I mean, these were all failures of imaginations. We did not think that they were going to happen and work on our back foot when they did. So imagining and engaging with our imaginations is oftentimes our very first line of defense.
And how do you cultivate that imagination?
As a military officer, you read. I mean, you read and you extrapolate. You have to just be a sponge. You have to read, and then allow your associative mind to take you to the places where you're going to have those types of breakthroughs. So I think it's critically important, and I think it's critically important too for the Marine Corps, because we have been tasked, right, to be the readiest to be the most ready when the nation is the least. And so the way we are the most ready is to be the most forward in the saddle imaginatively. Just like if you look back at the Second World War, right, like all of the amphibious doctrine, and we've all heard this, the landing manual in the 1930s, in Quantico, where this was all pioneered. All of that was pioneered before World War II. Like the imaginative work had been done to say, okay, this is what this would look like. People like, Major Pete Ellis, who'd like traveled to the South Pacific 15 years before World War II and he imagined the entire island hopping campaign before it ever happened. And because all of that work had been done, it in those early days of World War II allowed the Marine Corps to be the most ready when the nation was the least, and to, put Marines ashore on Guadalcanal, show what an island campaign would look like. And then, later in the war, you see, the Army and the bigger services that don't move quite as quickly and aren't supposed to, it's not a criticism, then sort of catch up and say, okay, these concepts are working. The Marine Corps is proving the concept. So if the Marine Corps isn't out there imagining, and the Marine Corps isn't out there proving concepts, then what is the Marine Corps aside from just sort of a little auxiliary army? So that's always been the Marine Corps' legacy, and to sort of do that imaginative work, and and then frankly, and then take some institutional risks. And sometimes the Marine Corps will be right, and when we're right, we'll do great things for the country. And if we're wrong, then it's not great for the Marine Corps, but the country will probably be okay because we got the Army. So
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder, I wonder if we'll see stunted imagination as more among individuals, as more and more people spend their free time, scrolling, rather than allowing that quiet time in your mind, to let your imagination work. No shade at social media or the internet. I mean,
Go ahead.
it's
You can do it.
the technology. It's a tool, and I know it's a great tool, and I use it every day. But I just wonder, without that free space for your brain to roam, because we're filling our brains constantly with information, images. Are we stunting a part of our development as people? I don't know. I'm just going off on a tangent here.
Sure, I don't. Listen. I think our phones are great, but they're not the place to go for sort of sustained engagement with ideas. It's not the place to go to if you really want to kind of think and ponder. It's the place to go to if you want to scroll cute videos of puppies or on your Instagram or whatever.
Right, but and what I'm saying is, as people do that just mindlessly, I'm guilty of it myself. You're inadvertently, or I am inadvertently cutting out that time to do real thinking and conceiving of ideas. I think people just automatically, there's no board anyway. And in fact, I remember before I got a smartphone, I asked my oldest, who was an adult already, I said, so do I really need one of these smartphone things, or can I just keep using my flip phone? And she said, well, I'll tell you what, you're never going to be bored in a waiting room again. And it really, there is never that moment of boredom where you're forced to get yourself out of the boredom with your own imagination. And are we taking that away from ourselves?
Yeah, I think we are. So it's a choice to do this type of intellectual work. It takes a certain type of rigor and a desire to do it. Just doesn't magically happen.
Yeah, and I think too, to reference back to what you were mentioning, Elliot, about grit, it is that sort of, and this is where the arts and the military sort of mimic one another, is that ability to look at those times of just sort of having some dead space, and what are you going to do with that time? Are you going to sharpen your tools, or, and not to say that there's anything wrong with vegging, but there is a thing where the vegging doesn't become the default setting, right? Like,
Sure.
the default setting is I'm going to continue to hone my craft. I have to make a conscientious effort to shut it down, or conscious effort to shut it down and actually do the relaxing part of it, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you got to. It's work. So it's work. It's not just play. If you want to read, if you're going to read deliberately or write deliberately or think deliberately, it's work. It's not finger painting.
Yeah. Well, Elliot, man, this has been really great. I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. I do want to, I guess, call back to something you had mentioned earlier when you were talking about green versus blue. Or I'm sorry, your earlier works, where you had mentioned that you like to write characters where you don't know who the good guy is, or the bad guy is, just by reading it. You have to keep going through, and these really dynamic, diverse characters. Where does that play in when we start talking about applicability, real world application, at the sort of strategic and the policy? Well, I guess even at the tactical level, when people are consuming art and they're tapping into this world that's opening them up to imagination, is does there have to be a clearly defined good versus bad for us to latch on to the lessons learned? Or do we also need to look at history and things? I guess what are the types of things that we should be consuming that are going to sharpen our swords, that are going to lead us, sort of facilitate a more diverse, imaginative worldview as we're thinking about what the future of conflict is going to look like?
Well, I think good art gestures towards truth, and truth is complex. So truth is not mustache twisting villains and good guys who wear capes. Truth is people who operate because of a complexity of motives, some noble, some ignoble, people who might act in good ways for the wrong reasons or act in the wrong ways but have good reason to do so. Truth is complex. The world is complex. And so if you're creating a work of art that gestures towards truth, by definition, you are creating a work of art inhabited by complex beings. And when I read a book and I meet a character who I'm not sure about, often they are complex, and they meet another complex character. And that to me feels like a true story, which is the type of story I want to read.
Is that, how prevalent is that right now in the arts? Because when you look at narratives that are existing outside of sort of literary art, it seems like there's a very considered effort to go away from that. We want to simplify everything. We want to ignore nuance. We want to put things into their bucket so they're more easily consumed. Is there any place, I mean, does that resonate? Are you seeing that, or do I need to stop doom scrolling?
Well, it's bad art. I think there's plenty of bad art out there.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff that I don't think is, that just isn't that, I think isn't that interesting. It doesn't resonate, doesn't feel true. You watch it and you feel like you're watching, you read it and it feels like you're watching, it feels like a cartoon. So I think, typically, again, I'm just talking about the stuff I like to consume: books, films, you name it. The ones that feel really true, that resonate with me, that leave me thinking about them long after I've, finished reading those types of books, are ones that are complex, and maybe I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be rooting for at the end of the day.
Nice. And what would those be? Like, what would your sort of top 5 be right now, off the top of your head?
Oh God. 5 books?
Or in any mediums that where they have this sort of complex narrative that you're talking about. I would say, shows would be fine too.
Well, I obviously like Starship Troopers, so we've covered that. Anna Karenina, I like Leo Tolstoy. I think Anna Karenina is a great book. If you never read it, that's a book, Anna, it's about an affair, but who is right or wrong in that relationship is not clear. The people who are unfaithful are not villains, and the people who are, being cheated on are not necessarily saints. I think that's a great book. That's about, basically about a marriage, but it's incredibly complex. The Godfather, not to be just a guy talking about another guy talking about, I love The Godfather. Who are the heroes, who are the villains in that movie? Big fan of Star Wars. Love Star Wars. Darth Vader, is he a bad guy? Is he a good guy? Who knows? I'm just trying to think, what have I been, I'm trying to think what I've been reading recently that's really good. I don't know. I always do terribly when I try to make these lists.
Yeah, I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this. I'm just really curious about, what it is that you are consuming.
I just read a book. I just finished reading this play, Wallenstein. which is just it's a play about the 30 Years' War, and it's about a general who's trying to end the 30 Years' War. It's by Friedrich Schiller, who was a playwright in the 18th century. Great play. It's just one of these like blind spots. I'd never read it before. It's a classic. And that's one where you don't know who's the good guy. Is it the general trying to end the war, or is it the generals trying to keep the war going? And that was written around the time of the French Revolution. Oh yeah, I just read it, and I just finished reading a pair of biographies. One a biography of Marie Antoinette, and the other biography of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, written by the writer Stefan Zweig, who was a 20th century Austrian writer. Who actually wound up committing suicide in 1940. He was sort of Jewish. He was forced out of Austria and was living in exile in Brazil. But he was one of the great like literary giants of the early 20th century. You can Google him. But he wrote novels that I had read, but I'd never read his biographies. And someone recommended those two biographies to me. They're fantastic. So, I read, and I very much believe that it's important to have kind of an associative mind. And I read really widely. I try not to like read in the narrow subject lane. I try to read all over the place. If I, that biography of Marie Antoinette, the only reason I read it was my wife had ordered it and it was sitting on our hall table. They're like, "Who ordered this?" And she's like, "I did." I'm like, "Why'd you order that?" I'm like, "Cause because I like that writer." And she's like, "Oh, I heard it's in this podcast. A friend of ours was on podcast and he was talking about it." And I was like, "Huh." I said, "Do you mind if I read this first?" She said, "Go ahead." And I was like, and I
you couldn't put it down.
Enjoyed it so much more. I couldn't put it down. It was fantastic. So yeah, I try to be kind of a little bit all over the place in what I consume. I'm not against like reading a book just kind of on a total whim.
Yeah. One of those that I found, but like the Power by Naomi Alderman, dude, it's so good. They end up doing a film adaptation. I think it's on Amazon or something. Cool. They're doing a series out of it, but the book itself, I was floored. It's so good. And then, yeah. Anyway, so
there's always amazing things to read. Always something new, something different. My best summer job when I was in college was working at a Walden bookstore at a mall. That I just really dated myself. But they encouraged us. Not only did we get a discount on books, but they encouraged us to check books out, just like at a library. And so I made it my mission to read something from every section of the store, so I could speak with some level of knowledge about whatever the topic was with the customer, which is why I decided I didn't really care for science fiction, but I'm kind of walking that back now.
Yeah.
Well, Elliot, man, this has been really great, dude. What are you working on now? Like, what do you got what pokers do you have in the fire?
My next book is titled Sheepdogs, and it's a series. It's a fun series of books. It's about two down on their luck former CIA officers turned international repo men. So they repossess jets, boats, and they find themselves in the midst of a repossession that goes sideways, and kind of hijinks ensue. So that's nice. The next book that will be coming out. Yeah, Sheepdogs will be out in about a year.
Cool, that sounds great.
And then 2054 just hit the shelves recently, right?
Yes, that came out back in March, so a few months ago.
Yeah, nice. And then is there a third to that? Is there a 2084?
There is. 2084 will be coming out in a little more than a year.
Okay.
A year and a half or two. So that's the next one. That will be the last one in the trilogy.
Great. And then are you still contributing to like The Atlantic or the Daily Beast or
Yeah, I am, and I'm still sort of doing my journalism as
awesome.
Well.
Yay.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, Elliot, man, thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. Hopefully your AC was working. I think I probably dropped about 5 pounds during this thing, but I'm really glad that that I was able to not fall out and stay on board for the entire interview. This is really great. And I'd love to talk to you more in the future about sort of what we get from narrative, not just from obviously, one of the monikers of this podcast is that stories matter. And so I just, I'd probably listen to you talk about narrative all day long, but yeah, I'd love to have you back on and talk a little more about what narrative means and what we do with it.
Thank you. Yeah, sure thing.
All right, man, take it easy.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for your
guys.
time.
Okay.
Bye.
Yep. Thanks. Bye-bye.
The Marine Corps requires leaders of all ranks to have a deep understanding of war and the employment of force. MCDP 1 reminds Marines that the military profession is a thinking profession. Every Marine is expected to be a student of the art and science of war. It goes on to say that every Marine has an individual responsibility to study the profession of arms. Self-directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. The Marine Corps Association understands the critical importance of ensuring that Marines are as mentally ready for combat as they are physically ready. That is why we offer an entire page dedicated to wargaming on our website. We have recommendations for both tabletop board games as well as computer games. And for Marine Corps Association members, there is a discount code for Wargame Design Studios that you can find on the website. Wargames are a great way to immerse yourself in history and to put yourself in the shoes of the great leaders of history. Go beyond guided instruction and experience the thrill of wargaming. Check us out at mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. That's mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. Take your training to the next level. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.